Hey guys, it's Carrying the Murphy guys. This is we're reviewing. This is a movie that I have been looking forward to for a very long time now. As I'm sure many of you have, it is easily one of the probably most talked about films of the Oscar season for sure. It is a film that I knew I had to watch before the year ends, and that is none other than Darkest Hour. And what Darkest Hour is essentially about is we center on Winston Churchill, and he has just recently been elected as prime minister, and he basically is brought a very important task where basically he has to decide if, this is when World War II is going on, and he has to try to figure out, does he want the war to continue, or does he want to possibly try to negotiate with Hitler and all the other Nazis and maybe come to some sort of an agreement to possibly, stop the war and put an end to it. And he really is kind of, you see throughout the film, he's very much contemplating which path to actually take, and we see how this really starts to have an effect on him overall. So, Darkest Hour in general, I was definitely looking forward to this movie for a couple reasons. I mean, obviously, Gary Oldman is a big one, but also because Winston Churchill in general seems to be a very popular figure right now. He's had definitely a resurgence, and I think it's probably because of The Crown. I think that really is what it's all about. I think because of, The Crown coming out last year, it's, he's such a hot topic right now. I wouldn't say hot topic is the word necessarily, but he's such a popular figure. Everyone really wants to talk about him. So, I was definitely interested in seeing this film's take on Winston Churchill overall. Also because, like I said, I thought it had a lot of Oscar consideration. There was just a lot of stuff I was very much looking forward to. And after watching Darkest Hour, what I overall think about it, while I don't think this is an amazing movie, I do still think this is a very well done film. It's got a great, obviously, a fantastic performance from Gary Oldman. We'll get to that in a little bit, but there are definitely quite a few things that make this movie very good. It's not great. I will definitely say that I do think this movie does have quite a few significant problems here and there, but we're just going to get into right now, starting off with the cast. And I mean, easily, that is the thing that's going to draw people into the theater. I think when most people think The Darkest Hour, not the shitty movie that came out in 2011. I know people keep making that joke, but if you call this movie The Darkest Hour, people are going to think you're talking about that Alien movie that came out in 2011 that no one saw, including myself included. But I think when people are referring to, Darkest Hour, I think the reason most people want to see it probably is because of the talent, and Gary Oldman obviously delivers here. I mean, he is phenomenal as Winston Churchill, completely unrecognizable, and he's really got it down pat. He's got the humorous side of Winston Churchill, but also the very cutthroat side. Winston Churchill is a man who very much knows what he wants, and he's a man that's full of his own morals, and you can see that, there are people who are trying to persuade him that maybe he should take this other path, but he remains very much on one side throughout the film, and I very much did like what they did with him. You also see how he struggles, and while the film isn't perfect in their portrayal of Winston Churchill, Oldman's performance really helps it stick out. I mean, even in some of the films, probably, more cheesy and silly scenes, Oldman still gives a fantastic performance. He is easily the thing that really does carry this film, and if he wasn't in the movie, I don't think this movie would be nearly as good as it really is. And then the other person I really want to talk about here is Kristin Scott Thomas as Churchill's wife, who, while she is limited in the film, she really does do a good job with her screen time overall. And she's got enough in the film where, she's such a good actress that her scenes really do stick out. Like I said, her scenes, while limited, she really does do very well here. I thought these two had very good chemistry. The way that she's kind of able to steer him in, especially when he's on a more sort of irrational path and he doesn't really know where to turn, she very much is his moral compass in the film. She's the one who steers him in the right direction. She's the one that reminds him of what he really wants to do, and I really did like their relationship throughout the film. I thought she did a really great job here. Their chemistry, like I said, is very much spot on, and again, while limited, I thought she still was very strong. And then everyone else in the film, I can't really say too much about. Lily James is good for what she has. Her character we'll get to in a little bit later, but she's good in the film, I guess. Ben Mendelsohn, not nearly in this film as much you think. He's only in the film for like a couple scenes, but he does a great job, obviously, in those scenes. And some of the best scenes are actually between him and Churchill, and seeing the different perspectives these characters have on the subject at hand. And I thought they both did a really great job. Really, everyone I thought did a good job here. I didn't really think there was a bad performance per se, and I think the acting in general was pretty spot on for the most part. So now let's get to the directing and the writing, because let me just say right off the bat, the directing, it's good. I will definitely say that. I don't think the directing is anything amazing. If there's one thing I really don't want this film to get nominated for, because I do think it has a lot of Oscar potential, I really don't want it to get nominated for Best Director, because sure, the directing here is fine, but it's very safe. Like, it doesn't really have a particular style. It's very, very much just your standard type, biopic on Winston Churchill. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but again, because of the fact that we are in Oscar season right now and it is getting talked about, I'm just really hoping we don't see a Best Director nomination, because I don't really think the film deserves it. I'm not saying the directing's bad. The directing, it's fine for what the film, is trying to accomplish. I think the directing, Joe Wright does do a good job, but it just feels very safe. It doesn't feel like it's anything that distinctive or, anything that really does stand out. There's no specific aesthetic that he has, and I think for the most part the directing, it's good. It's just nothing really that amazing. And same with the writing. I don't think the screenplay is anything to ring home about. And in fact, I will admit, some of the writing here I did find to be just a little bit boring. I wouldn't say it's all the way boring. It's just slow at points, definitely. I think there were definitely some scenes that do drag on a little bit. The story in general, I actually surprisingly was into. I was surprised by how much I did care about the story, and the conflict I also thought was very interesting, especially, a lot of the theories and a lot of the points that Winston brings up, I think do make a lot of sense, but there are points in the film where we aren't necessarily supposed to be on Churchill's side, and that's when we come to probably my biggest problem with this film, in that the film often portrays Churchill as this amazing figure. He's just someone who is able to just bring so much hope and just distill all of this sort of, distill any sort of problems or any sort of worries that these characters had and just perk them up and, hype them up and things like that. And that's fine. I know Churchill was definitely a very good speaker, but the film doesn't really show that he has many flaws. I mean, sure, there are scenes where you see he's struggling with something, but to me, it seemed like the film wanted us to just go along with everything that Churchill was doing and never to really bat an eye or anything like that. And there were some things where I'm like, you know what? I don't think that's necessarily how it should go. I don't think he's actually in the right there. So there were actually some times where, I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't always on his side. So I do think the film does struggle a bit with the characterization of Churchill. And I think, the reason for that is because, like I said, the film's trying to portray him as this amazing figure, which I'm sure he is, but it's less of a film that is a biopic of Winston Churchill and more just like, oh, look how great Churchill was. Look at all the great things he's done, look at what he really did, in this specific time. It didn't really feel like it was fleshing him out. He didn't feel as full-fledged as a character as he really could. Like I said, Oldman really does a great job at developing him and peeling back the layers a bit, but it is more in Oldman's performance than it is in the writing overall, and that is something I did have a bit of a problem with. Also, there are things the film very much does brush over. The idea that many of these people don't think that Churchill is fit to run. We just don't really get that much into the other characters, and especially when it comes to characters like Stephen Dillane or anyone like that, especially Lily James, though. Lily James in this movie, I've heard a lot of people defend her because it has to be said, while Lily James does a good job, she's pretty much wasted in this film. She doesn't really have much of anything to do. Most of her scenes involve her just being his secretary and her just overhearing conversations, and it reminded me very much of the man Man Who Invented Christmas, the relationship that Dan Stevens has with that character of Tara. But the difference with that is that that connection felt a lot more endearing. The only reason I think they gave us this character is so we could get sort of a worldview into Churchill and see how someone else would perceive him. Unfortunately, I just don't think it really worked out as well as the film wanted it to. Lily James she doesn't feel like a necessary part of the story. She doesn't really feel like she needs to be there. And like I said, I've heard people say that it's supposed to be more like, this is how we view Churchill. This is like us seeing him, and, Lily James is supposed to be us, essentially, but she's not the main character, and she's not in this movie all that much. So, I mean, she's in it for a decent amount, but she's not, like, throughout the movie. She's not in, like, every scene. So if you really do make that point, you have to take account of the fact that she's not in this movie, a ton. She's not the main character here. If they wanted to do that, they should have just made her the main character, and like I said, that just really didn't work altogether. The scenes that the two have are really well done. I will definitely say, I think the two do have some really well done scenes. It's just her character feels very one note, and James does a good job, but it was just one of those things where I feel anyone really could have played her character there, but there are also some scenes in this movie that I did find just a little bit cheesy, and again, I think it's just boils down to the fact that the film, it portrays Churchill as this amazing figure. It doesn't really, there's a scene where he's trying to hype all these people up on a bus. I'm not going to say too much more about that, though. It's just, that scene in general, it felt very cheesy, and it felt like they only did that, again, to just hype everyone up and show that Churchill was this amazing guy, and again, it just didn't really all come together in the end. But there are great scenes in this movie. There are things that I definitely really did love, and like I said, I think the cinematography here is great. I will definitely say that. The makeup on Oldman looks fantastic. He honestly does look just like Churchill. He's got the portrayal down pat for sure. The score here is kind of whatever, and the editing. I will admit, there are some scenes that I wouldn't say I was necessarily bored throughout the movie. There were some sections where I definitely did feel the length a lot, and I think it's because this movie did not need to be 2 hours long. I think this easily could have been like 100 and something minute movie. It did not need to be nearly as long as it is, and I really did feel the length sometimes throughout the film. And like I said, I did find the overall conflict that Churchill was dealing with very compelling, and you could really make compelling arguments for both sides here. On one side, that these men are in fact fighting, and they're risking their lives here, and there are many, innocent people that are dying, and yeah, you can definitely see why someone would want to ally with Hitler, but at the same time, it is Hitler. I mean, who wants to ally with someone like that? And you can see the utter disdain that Churchill, and I think probably most of the country shared at that point. I think, people still have that disdain. So I did think that was actually very well realized. And again, Oldman's performance there really does shine very well, especially in scenes where he's being, you can see how passionate he is with this. You can see how much this means to him. And you can see why he really is so adamant about not going in that direction, about, keeping these men in war and wanting them to fight. You can totally see why he wants to do that. And I did think that was very well presented here. Those were definitely some of the best scenes in the film, were just Churchill's reasoning for why he wanted this. So really, when it does come down to, guys, I don't think Darkest Hour is at all a, bad film. It is honestly a good film. I did enjoy it for the most part. There are just some things that I do think the film could have done just a little bit more. Like I said, it does feel very safe. It does very much feel like it was made very much to get Oldman that Oscar, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think he very much deserves it, and, it's akin to, how everyone wanted Leo DiCaprio to get an Oscar, and they did The Revenant, and that got him an Oscar. I think The Revenant is admittedly a better film altogether, but that's a whole different story. I think this is very similar in the fact where Oldman is going to get the Oscar here, and if he does, that's great. I think he very much deserved it. I think he does a very good job here, and I think he really does elevate this film. Like I said, it's not a perfect film by any means. It does have those flaws that I talked about, but in the end, I enjoyed it more than I expected to, for sure. I think it could have been a lot more boring, and if you didn't have someone someone like Oldman who's so captivating and just so dynamic in the role and really breathes a lot of life into the film, I don't think this film would be nearly as good as it ended up being. And when it really does come down to it, guys, I don't think The Darkest Hour, like I said, is an amazing movie. It's not really something I could necessarily see myself watching again, but I did enjoy it for the most part, and I am overall going to give Darkest Hour a B-. So overall, guys, we reviewed Darkest Hour. Let me know what you guys thought of this movie overall. Loved your thoughts. Like I said, I would recommend this movie overall. I do think it is definitely very well done. If just to see how great Oldman is in the role, I think that's enough of a reason to check it out. It's nothing amazing, though. It's nothing to ring home about. And the reason you haven't heard a lot about it is just because the fact that I think compared to all the other, Oscar films come out, this one just doesn't really hold as much merit. But that's my review. Hope you guys enjoyed. See you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.